Oh, hi there. Sorry, you caught me swiping. Isn't it funny how social media and especially these dating apps really put into focus how little information it takes for us to begin making judgments about something as important like who we want to spend our lives with, who we want to date. We are piecing together a sense of another person from just a few bits and pieces of information, a headless picture, a name, and some cliche lines that are gag worthy, right? And we're already beginning to jump to conclusions about who this other person who's not us might be. We are complex and complicated individuals, but sometimes other people appear to us like flat, simple characters. We get a few bits of information and we make them out to be something that maybe they're not. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the second part of social perception, our sense of others. And to do this, I'm going to reference some things from the textbook and offer you a perception check that doesn't appear in the textbook. But first, let's talk about some of the factors of social perception or social misperception, as the case may be. When we are interacting with one another and things are happening in the world, we're always trying to attribute a certain cause or motivation to people's actions in order to determine what's happening. And this is called attribution theory. You'll read about it in the textbook. I'll probably ask you about it a little bit on the quiz. But attribution theory says that people are always trying to attribute causes to other people's actions and our own actions and the outcomes of those actions. We generally attribute two different causes. Internal attribution is crediting internal causes for the outcome of some actions, and external attributions is giving credit to some environmental factor in our attributions of others' actions. So the classic example would be somebody is late to a meeting, and if we were to use internal attribution, we would say the causes of that person being late to a meeting is something internal to them. They're careless, they're poorly organized, they don't respect the relationship that they're going to meet with, something like that. Internal attribution would explain the cause of their action as something inside them. External attribution, on the other hand, would be to say, oh, they're late, and maybe it's because the traffic was bad at this hour, or maybe something came up with the babysitter, and now they're unable to get out of the house on time. So those are the two different types of attributions that we make, and we make them for other people's actions and for our own. What are the causes of what people are doing? The causes of things are really hard to determine, right? In fact, the people who are doing them might not know why they're doing it to begin with, and there might be multiple factors at play. Yet, in order to make sense out of the world, we're kind of constantly guessing at what are the causes of this, and we operate with a certain attribution that we think is true. Oftentimes, we commit what's called a fundamental attribution error, and this is a mistake that's very common in people's interpretations of others' actions. And the fundamental attribution error is where you attribute internal causes to other people's negative behavior. So it's basically blaming people for bad things that happen because of something about their personal character or their internal attribution. And we just have a tendency to do that when we are thinking about other people's actions, especially people we don't know, people we might not like that much, or people just who aren't ourselves, right? And so the other side of that is what's called the self-serving bias. And the self-serving bias is that when something bad happens, or when I do something bad, I fall short of an expectation of my friends, then I blame something external. It has nothing to do with my character. It has to do with something in the environment that kept me from being able to live up to the expectations of my friends. So we are kind of giving people the raw end of the deal when it's them, and then we give ourselves the treatment with gloves on, right? And this is called the self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution error. I'd like you to know those. Related to this is the idea that our perceptions of other people can sometimes be shaped on limited amounts of data, and we take that data and we overgeneralize. And I talked about overgeneralization in the last video. One type of overgeneralization that we might do for other people is what's called the halo effect. The halo effect is you take one positive aspect about them and then you kind of see them in the light of that positive aspect going forward. It could be something as simple as a friend of mine likes this person, and I go, well, my friend likes them, then I like them too. And I get a halo effect. Or I really like punk rock bands, and you're a drummer in a punk rock band, so I think, wow, that's really great. This person's really cool. They're really interesting. That sort of initial positive reaction has a kind of halo glow over you, and I start to see you in a positive light. And the opposite of that, the horn effects, is there's a negative interaction that gets overly generalized, and I start viewing the other person through a very negative light. We had a very awkward interaction the first time I saw you. I was in a bad mood the first time I saw you. I've had people who just reminded me of other people who I didn't enjoy their company, and so I had a negative horn effect going on with that person, and it took a while before I was able to see through that. So it's important here to remember that one, we don't really know the causes of people's actions. We don't have access to that. We can guess, and sometimes we're good at guessing, but we're often wrong. And we tend to do it in a way that favors ourselves and not others. And then two, our perceptions of people unfold and grow over time, and so we should give some time and more information before we give people a halo or a horn, as it may be. So those are two things to consider. I want to turn now to some of the textbooks tips for improving our perceptions of others really quickly. They're kind of short. Oh, that's not it. Close this. Excuse me. Here's the textbook. The textbook tells us that if we want to be better, more accurate, more compassionate perceivers of other people, then we might want to develop empathic listening. Empathic listening is listening to try to understand the position and perspective and feelings of another person. And we're doing that in order to try to support their feelings, to make them feel better, to help them through a difficult time. So it's listening to emotionally support somebody. And generally, people are good and they deserve the benefit of the doubt. And we can try to empathize with where they're coming from and understand where they're coming from before we jump to big conclusions about them. The second one that the textbook talks about is just being aware of your stereotypes and your prejudices about other people. And this is a good thing to consider. Consider your own cultural upbringing, your own familial upbringing, what you're used to, what you consider to be normal. That might not be what everybody else considers to be normal. In fact, there's a lot of versions of what's the norm and normal. So don't impose your stereotypes or your misperceptions on others. And then the last one the textbook talks about is just checking perception. And it doesn't really elaborate too much upon what types of perception checks you might use. So I have one that I want you to consider that I call the DIE perception check here, DIE. Kind of an unfortunate but memorable name for this perception check. And essentially what you're trying to do when you're doing this perception check is you're trying to understand if the way you're talking about somebody and thinking about somebody is either descriptive, is an inference, or is an evaluation, a description, inference, or evaluation. And to try to sort through mentally those differences. When we are describing another person's behavior, we're focusing on what we actually saw, right? What could be objectively recorded as what was done, right? We're not jumping ahead yet to the meaning of what was done. We're just saying, what did I see? What did I observe? What can I say actually did happen? Exclusive of meaning. So something like that would be, a descriptive statement would be, my child raised their voice. That's something that can be measured pretty scientifically. You're just describing it as is. An inference goes further, and now you're getting into beginning to understand the meaning of what's going on, trying to assume or ascribe the meaning of what's going on. And remember, that's complicated and difficult to do. So inference is ascribing meaning to another person's actions. For example, here, my child is trying to get my attention. Right? Description, my child raised their voice. I'm going to make meaning out of that. Oh, my child's trying to get my attention. Okay, that may be the case. It may not be the case. Notice, though, you've shifted from describing what you saw to now ascribing a meaning. And then the last level here is a difficult level that we all struggle with, which is evaluating character. It's kind of making a big picture concept of the other person based on what you saw. So making a value judgment about the person based on what you think happened. Coming to the conclusion, for example, that my child is disrespectful. Okay, so when we're thinking about your friends' behaviors, the behavior of the people that you're interacting with, are you jumping ahead to evaluating their character based on their behavior? And have you done enough examination of what you're actually seeing that makes you think that way, right? Remember the horn effect. Did you just see one thing and it's making you feel that way? What did you actually see? Try to describe that in your mind. Inference, okay. When you're going to make inferences, you're guessing, and it's important to kind of remember that you could be wrong. You don't really know. You haven't gotten their input yet. You haven't asked for clarification yet. You haven't sought more information. So though you might have a working meaning that you're inferring here, just keep in mind it is an assumption. And then when you go to evaluate, be very careful. If you're trying to actually interact with this person and find out what's going on with them and do some empathic listening, a bad way to start off with is with evaluation here, right? So here's an example of evaluation. Quit being a bad friend and listen to me. You're out with your friend, they're on their phone swiping left, swiping right, and they're just not paying attention to you. And so you say to them, quit being a bad friend, listen to me. Notice what you've done. You've evaluated their behavior. You're perceiving them as a friend in a certain way, and you're saying, listen to me. That might not, go over well with them, and also you're opening yourself up for a misunderstanding here. It might be better to say something along the lines of, I've noticed you've been looking at your phone while I'm talking, and you're nodding instead of answering me. This is more objective, more arguably observable that you would both agree upon. And it's just describing what you're seeing to the person. You can follow that up with are you okay? I've noticed you're on your phone. I'm trying to talk to you. Is everything okay? Again, using that kind of empathic listening. And if you want to go on to an inference in your discussion with your friend, ground it in your own feelings and in your own interpretation, and make sure they understand that this is just one possibility and that you're interested in finding out what they think. When you do that, when you're on your phone swiping right and left, I start to feel like you're bored with my story. These are my feelings. I start to feel like you're bored, with my story. Are you bored? Is that what's going on? Or is there some other explanation? Because it makes me feel bad, and it starts making me feel like maybe this friendship isn't as good as I thought it was. Okay, now you can get kind of closer to evaluation without being so accusatory. So trying to keep in our minds the difference between describing what we're actually witnessing and seeing, sticking to that as much as we can. What is it we saw? What did we observe? From there, inferring and checking in to that our inferences are correct, owning our inferences from our own position, and then perhaps offering a possible evaluation, though be careful with that. So that's a perception check that I'd like to offer you, and you could write about this in an upcoming conceptual reflection quiz if you like. So we're always piecing together other people. Sometimes people seem easy, predictable. We know exactly who they are, but over time we learn they're more complicated, just like us, and we come to understand them on a much deeper level. So give it the time and watch out for these perception errors.